When a crime is committed, the perpetrator inevitably leaves behind something, a description, DNA, or physical evidence. This is the criminal's print on the scene. Welcome to the Criminal Prints Podcast, Episode 9.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Criminal Prints Podcast. This is Zach.
And I'm Jaron.
We're thrilled to have you. Thank you very much for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about the disappearance of Susie Lamplugh. Susie was born on May 3rd, 1961 in Cheltenham, England. And Cheltenham, England in 2014 had a population of 116,500.
She was the daughter of Diana and Paul Lamplugh, and she wasn't an only child. She had a brother and two sisters. The brother was named Richard, and the sisters were Tamsin and Lizzie. She was described as being high-spirited, and one of her favorite sayings was, "Life's for living."
She was a very confident young woman who loved to travel. And for a period of time, she actually worked on the QE2, or the Queen Elizabeth II, which was a cruise ship, and she worked as a hairdresser and was able to travel the world. It was perfect for her.
And if you've ever been on a cruise, you'll know that you have to be pretty high-spirited to work on a cruise ship.
Oh, certainly. So the day we're going to be talking about, unfortunately, starts on July 28th, 1986.
Much like one of our previous cases, Lindsay Buziak, Susie was a real estate agent. And unfortunately, this one starts in a similar manner. She had an appointment scheduled to show a home to a person that called themselves Mr. Kipper at 1245 in Fulham. We know this is the name that she wrote in her office diary, where she recorded some of the details of this appointment. Specifically, she wrote 1245 Mr. Kipper-37 Sherald's O-S.
And I'll put a picture of the notes on our Facebook and our Twitter so you guys can see it. But we know that the Sheralds refers to Sherald's Road, and the OS, what that meant is outside the property. So at 12:40 p.m., Susie left her office, which was Sturgis and Sons Real Estate, and that was located at 654 Fulham Road. She took her house and car keys, along with her purse that contained 15 pounds in it, or I guess for us that'd be $15, and she left behind her handbag.
Susie was wearing a gray skirt, a dark jacket, and low heels that day. We know she arrived at the property because at 12:50 there was a witness that saw her outside the property, and at about 1 o'clock she was joined by a man who we believe to be Mr. Kipper. Only minutes after that, they were both seen walking away from the home, and witnesses report seeing a woman who matches Susie's description arguing with a well-dressed man wearing a suit at Sherald's Road.
So the suit, we'll come back to this and mention this multiple times, but the suit is definitely interesting here. So then they said that they saw the lady got into a car, which was believed to be a dark-colored or black BMW, and that the man was wearing a suit, and also, as an interesting note, Jaron, was carrying a bottle of champagne.
Which will come up again later. So later that evening, Susie's boss called her mother, Diana, which of course is a little unusual, and said, "Hey, do you have any idea where your daughter might be? We wondered whether she could have come home for lunch. We don't want to worry you, but she left to see a client before lunch and she hasn't returned. So we wanted to check in and see what's going on." For her mother, knowing Susie, this set off alarm bells immediately because Susie was very much followed the rules, followed the regulations, and for her not to come back to work was a big red flag, and she knew something must be wrong.
And I'll add in here, Susie was a very, very polite, very good person. She was, as Jaron was saying, a rule follower to a T. So it was extremely strange that she had not been heard from since that time. At 6:45 p.m., Susie's boss decided to call the police and report her missing. Her mother, Diana, said that my initial reaction of frozen shock gave way to a flood of adrenaline, which shot me into overdrive. We must find her. Physically, all that energy must be directed into action.
So at just after 10 o'clock, Susie's company car, a white Ford Fiesta, was discovered outside a property for sale in Stevenage Road in Fulham. This is about a mile and a half from the property that she was supposed to meet with Mr. Kepper at.
So that's pretty close.
It is, very close. Her mother Diana also said, "My husband and I went down to the river where her car had been abandoned. We called, we shouted, we encouraged our dogs to search for her. We must have been disturbing the neighborhood, but more than that, as the police who were there made it clear, we were getting in their way." So again, she had all this energy and all this adrenaline, and she was putting it to use looking for her daughter.
And as a parent, I'm sure she wanted more than anything to find her, and she was just doing anything she can, which I completely respect. When they found the car, so the handbrake was off. Interesting enough, the keys were missing, but the car was unlocked. So they did find Susie's purse, which was in a storage pocket in the car side door. And the money, the 15 pounds, was still in her purse. She also had a straw hat that was on the dashboard. But an interesting note, the car wasn't parked properly. It was overlapping somebody's garage.
Which, just from what we know of Susie, doesn't match right off the bat there. That's kind of a strange deal.
It's definitely a red flag.
And to add to that, the position of the driver's seat was wrong for what Susie had it. So it looked as if the car had been staged and driven by another person.
So also, there was a black, possibly left-handed drive BMW that was seen at the same location as Susie's car in Stevenage Drive or
And
Road.
left-hand drive would be unusual over there. All their vehicles are right-hand drive.
Definitely, very unique. So, talking about Susie's car again, unfortunately, there were no signs of a struggle inside the car, and no fingerprints were found that were unaccounted for.
So in December of 1986, Diana and Paul established the Susie Lamplugh Trust. The mission of this trust was to raise awareness of personal safety through training and various projects, to help people avoid becoming victims of aggression, and to offer counseling and support to relatives and friends of missing people. Obviously, they did this because after going through this experience, they saw the need for all of these things.
And that's really cool because they realized, hey, we probably won't be able to bring Susie back, but we're going to do everything in our power to make sure this doesn't happen to anybody else. That's incredible that her parents did that.
It is, and they spent a lot of their life dedicated to this, so it really is cool. They followed through, and it was very important to them.
Susie's car, the area where her car was found, was searched with dogs and a bunch of extra patrolmen, but they didn't find any evidence or trace of Susie.
They even went and searched her flat, obviously, her apartment, but they didn't find anything out of place. They didn't find any signs of a struggle. And so in 1987, with nothing to go on, they were completely at a standstill. And again, they had very few leads. There was no body. There was really no evidence. All they had was eyewitness stuff.
So DNA was actually tested. The officers were really, really trying. It was tested against 800 unidentified bodies of people that could have been Susie, resembled her, but unfortunately no match was found.
So with this, the case didn't have anything come up until 1998, and then again in 2000, they kind of changed their focus. They renewed the investigation, and they questioned somebody who had already been talked to in 1989 and 1990. So this person is John Cannon, and a lot of the remainder of this podcast is going to be spent talking about John Cannon. He was a convicted sex offender, He had just been released from prison 3 days before the disappearance. That's some coincidence, isn't it?
Yeah, holy cow. Talk about timing.
Yeah, and he had served 5 years of a 8-year sentence of rape.
And so everybody that you talked to that knew John said that he liked or he preferred professional women. He would, according to one of his ex-girlfriends, he would try to win the women over by buying them flowers, chocolates, and champagne.
And you don't have to go very far back to remember this person brought champagne for the realtor.
So on the day that Susie went missing, a local shopkeeper identified a man who came in that morning and purchased a very expensive bottle of champagne as John Cannon.
So we know that John Cannon bought champagne that morning. We know that Mr. Kipper brought champagne to meet with Susie. And those are coincidental, but it is very interesting.
And I agree with you completely, Jaron. Even though this is circumstantial evidence, at what point do you have enough of it that it just red flags go off everywhere? So another ex-girlfriend of John heard about Susie's disappearance, and she said, quote, "As soon as I heard about Susie, I knew it was John. It had all the hallmarks right down to the champagne."
John's acquaintances at the time said he bragged about a woman he was dating in Fulham and gave a description that matched Susie. So from what we've been able to find, he was in some sort of halfway house that they had in the UK. So he was able to go out and come back at night, so it would be possible for him to meet people. So it is possible that Susie was in a relationship with John Cannon, and her family was aware that she was seeing a man who she had recently met, but they did not know his name. Originally, they were excited that she was dating this guy, and she seemed excited, but it faded because she voiced concerns that he could be married and also said one of the recent dates had been kind of scary.
She also said, I guess other real estate agents that worked with Susie said that she had been receiving frequent calls at work and that she had planned to have lunch with this individual and end the relationship with him because it just wasn't going in the direction she wanted it to.
And to back that up, her roommate or flatmate said that she was receiving a bunch of phone calls at home and flowers were being delivered, and it made Susie very uncomfortable. Multiple witnesses confirmed Susie had said her boyfriend was from the Bristol area and John Cannon's family was from the Bristol area.
I'm just going to say so far that is a lot of circumstantial evidence that can go against this individual, John Cannon.
Yeah, it is. And former girlfriends of Cannon, and he had a few, say that he was very charming and romantic at first and that he would buy flowers and gifts, which match exactly. They also said that he had a really bad temper when he was rejected.
And when we talked about Susie earlier with this individual, they were arguing.
They were arguing.
So John, an interesting story about John Cannon is he at one point knocked on the door of a house that was for sale. And keep in mind, he didn't have a real estate agent with him. So it was kind of one of those things. He went up to the door and knocked on it, wanted to see the house. So the lady let him in and said that John started acting very strange, very suspicious. But thank goodness at that time, the lady's husband walked in and John immediately left.
Witnesses also came forward saying that Cannon was looking through the window of her real estate office the day before Susie went missing.
So, Jaron, was John possibly stalking Susie?
I would say that you could argue it. I mean, it seems to kind of line up that way. But again, everything as of now is very circumstantial.
So also, former inmates that were in prison with John said that he actually confessed to Susie's murder and said, quote, "Police will never find her body."
So another thing about his stint in prison that is very interesting, kind of damning, was that his nickname was Kipper. because that's a type of fish, and it's common for breakfast, and he'd always ask for their breakfast. So he got this moniker Kipper, which of course matches Mr. Kipper, who she was supposed to be meeting.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's probably not a common name you would hear.
It also doesn't help that he says stuff like, quote, "I may well tell all when my mother dies," end quote.
Another one of his girlfriends, my oh my, John had a crap ton of previous girlfriends,
Yeah, he did.
said that John, quote, had a very strong interest in the Susie case. And we will also post this to Facebook and Twitter so you can see, but the sketch that the police did, because there were a lot of eyewitnesses, at least in my opinion, Jaron, I'd like to get yours too, I think it very strongly resembles John Cannon.
Yeah, the sketch was dead on, basically.
So in August 2010, a criminologist who had corresponded with Cannon said that there was actually DNA evidence that linked Lamplaw to a Ford Sierra once used by Cannon. So at least in my mind, I think to myself, okay, if according to John Cannon, he's never met Susie, doesn't have any idea who she is, how in the world could they link her DNA to a car that he once used?
But it does lend credence to the idea that maybe they were seeing each other.
Certainly.
He could have been in this car. It could have not been the black BMW, but just another car that he owned, obviously.
So then, I guess you would say that John really came on the radar in 1987. And this is because he was convicted of rape and murder of another young woman that actually appearance was fairly similar to Susie by the name of Shirley Banks.
We had to mention Shirley so that this evidence would make sense. So, when they found Shirley's car outside of his apartment, it had a license plate with a false number on it. And the number was SLP 386S. So we'll just talk about that number really quick. SLP are Susie's initials. There's also an 86. She went missing in 1986. So it's just one of those things where you go, that's a strange number to... Of course, he had to pull it out of thin air because he faked the license plate. He made that up.
And John Cannon, let it be known, you're a complete scumbag. You're scum of the earth. But he is not a dumb individual. He's a very intelligent individual. And it, at least in my opinion, seems like it's something he would do. And he would be, unfortunately, smart enough to be able to do.
So Cannon was once interviewed about the fake plates. And Zach, what did we learn from that interview?
So he acknowledged that it could be Susie's initials. He didn't deny that. But he claimed he got it from a Bristol businessman from whom he bought the car from for £100. And he claimed that this businessman was responsible for Susie's death.
And then they asked if he was the businessman, and he said yes. But then he went, uh-oh, and he said, no, I'm not him.
Yeah, he immediately realized, oh crap, I said the wrong thing. I actually told the truth. I need to take that back.
He also allegedly told an astrologist who visited him in jail that a Bristol businessman murdered Lamplaw and that he knew who killed Shirley, Susie, and another girl.
So we've got multiple witnesses that said they had to swerve out of the way of a white Ford Fiesta matching the description of Susie's car, and that the driver appeared to be arguing with a man wearing a suit in the passenger seat. So they could have possibly been on their way to look at a different property. And did she reject him? Did she tell him if they were in a relationship, I want to break this off? Do you think Jeremy could have just lost his temper?
Well, it sounds like he would often lose his temper with rejection, so it's definitely possible, yeah. So in 1994, Susie was officially declared dead, and that's a step they took even though they have been unable to find a body to that point. And in November of 2002, the Scotland Yard, the police in the area, held a press conference at which the officer named John Cannon as a person of interest and said that they believed he killed Susie.
So this is absolutely huge. The police flat out said, "We believe you killed Susie." You don't do that without having been convicted.
Yeah, it's as if they had basically lost hope in convicting him, and so at this point they're just going to say it even though they know they won't get a conviction.
In April of 2001, a previous girlfriend of Cannon said that he suggested that Susie's body was buried at the Norton Barracks, and that's a former military base.
Yeah, so in February 2001, they began searching it. They searched a site close to it anyway, and they didn't find anything. But the barracks had since been developed, so it was really more or less impossible to search it correctly.
That really sucks. In April of 2001, they had a week-long search of Quintock Hills in Somerset that was conducted, and they had 20 officers search, and they searched because they'd received a tip that a local man's family member had seen an individual digging in the area around the time of Susie's disappearance, but unfortunately nothing was found, and this is kind of a trend that will continue.
Really, that's just an illustration of how willing they were to look.
Yeah, they gave it their all, and they continue to investigate and continue to dig when anything comes up.
So in August of 2010, they excavated a field near the village of Drake's Broughton. It's about 3 miles from the Norton Barracks. And once again, in this excavation, they didn't find anything at all.
And then in October 2018, and I'll add here that this is a case that I personally would love to see solved. And this is when I really started researching it pretty hard. The police began searching the former house of John's mother, who had lived in Sutton Coldfield. And police had been there in 2002, but they didn't really dig anything up and did just kind of a visual inspection.
The reason they had been there in 2002 is because one of John's cellmates claimed that John told him Susie was buried under the patio at the home.
So, Jaron, I'm getting from this that John will tell everybody that isn't law enforcement tips, whether it's accurate or not, who knows?
Yeah, it basically seems he's willing to confess to anything unless it's to the cops. They actually dismantled the garage and removed the concrete floor, and they also went out to the back garden and excavated there as well. But again, in November 12th, 2018, they announced that the search had concluded and they didn't find anything.
So that's a few weeks long. That's a very detailed search that they did.
Yeah, and this was fairly publicized at the time. They really searched well, or they did their very best to anyways, and there was just nothing to be found.
So in August of 2011, Susie's mother, Diana, passes away, unfortunately, at the age of 75. And in June of 2018, her father, Paul, passed away at the age of 87. So it really sucks that they didn't live long enough in their lifetime to see justice, despite, I would say, dedicating themselves and their rest of their lives to helping others and trying to find justice for their daughter.
Yeah, that is very sad, but it's cool that they were able to at least have a positive influence, hopefully, on future people and hopefully even prevent a few more tragedies. So currently, the investigation status is this. In November of 2018, Detective Chief Superintendent Richard Wood, shout out for the cool name there, Richard, said, "The case remains open and the Met remains committed to bringing Susie's killer to justice. We will continue to assess any new information that comes in."
And then Jim Dickey, who was actually in charge of one of the previous times that they looked into it and reopened the case, he said that until Cannon shows remorse and or says where he put the body, I'm not sure there's anywhere left to go.
Yeah, that is sad. We don't even need to analyze that. He just flat out saying, until he tells us where she's at.
That's horrible.
Yeah, that is horrible.
So prime suspect John Cannon continues to deny any involvement. And Jaron, he has actually complained about the assassination of his character.
Yeah, the poor guy wrote in a letter to a friend that he was deeply upset that they were digging up his mom's old garden, and the quote, "The police and press assassination of me has upset me deeply. Worse, I am in no position to reply to it, so I feel powerless." Well, you're right, John. You're not in a position to reply because you're in jail.
Yeah, because you're a rapist and a murderer.
He also said, quote, "At the time I was living my life very much in the shadows because what I was doing. So take nothing at face value. Strange, really. The reality of my life is so much more interesting, yet it has been buried."
It has been buried. Wow. Very interesting choice of words that old John used right there. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but unfortunately, John is intelligent enough to completely mock the police, to use words like that. It has been buried. For example, the license plate. Jaron, do you think he's just blatantly mocking the police because they can't pin it on him?
I think he most likely is, yeah. And you can actually search his name and find a video of him speaking it was like a profile for a dating service he was in. And you can just tell from listening to him that he's slick.
So now we're going to go with conclusions a little bit, kind of our thoughts on it. I'll start out. I think it's a horrible situation. It's horrible what happened to Susie. My personal opinion is I do believe the police know who did it. I do believe that John Cannon is responsible for Susie's murder. Unfortunately, it's circumstantial evidence, but in my mind, it is a mountain of circumstantial evidence. And at what point do you say, oh man, this is enough, that this adds up to where he needs to be arrested? And they actually did arrest him at one point, but decided not to charge him.
So my thoughts are, if he did not commit it, whoever did will never be found. Because the only stuff we have, it all matches John. And he most likely did it. I mean, it seems fairly clear-cut, really, that he did it.
So if you have any tips, Jaron, who do they contact with any information? Please share. If you have anything at all that will help this case, please share it with the proper authorities.
Yeah, and if you do, it's most likely because you were a cellmate with him. But you would call the call officers at 0207 230 4295 or contact Crime Stoppers anonymously at 0800 555 111. And these are foreign phone numbers, so if you're an American, that's why they sound a little strange.
And I'll add on, too, that you were either a cellmate, which I agree with, or an astrologist.
Yeah, good point. You could be an astrologist and know something about this case.
So that is the case of Susie Lamplaw. We thank everybody very much for listening to us. Please check out our Facebook and our Twitter. And if you would be so kind, please review us on whichever app you listen to. It would be very useful and very helpful for the podcast to grow. And everybody have a fantastic day.
And remember, keep your record clean and your prints off the scene.